Adolf Hitler.
He is the architect of one of the greatest disasters the world has ever seen.
For 79 years, the world thought his underground hideout had been sealed forever, lost beneath Berlin and erased from history. However, this secret bunker stood strong, breathing and holding secrets about the war that no one else knew.
People generally think of Hitler at the Eagle's Nest, Eva Braun's home movies, or they think of him perhaps in the bunker in Berlin. But in reality, he spent over 800 days at the Wolf's Lair.
Now, in 2024, a team of specialists gained access. What they found stunned even the toughest investigators. Nothing could prepare them, or the world, for what lay inside. The evidence was undeniable, and it turns out Hitler had seen it all and even known it all. So what exactly was found? Join us in this video as we explore the details of what they found in Hitler's hidden bunker. The discovery, after 79 years, finding the deep rots of history. It began with nothing more than a narrow hole, barely wide enough for a drone. Beneath a cracked sidewalk near the old Reich Chancellery, the team had located a partially collapsed access shaft into Hitler's bunker, now 79 years old. After months of negotiations and meticulous planning, permission was finally granted. But no one could step inside right away.
The bunker's emergency exit and ventilation tower were blown up, causing these solid concrete structures to fall over. Later they were broken up, the ruins of the Reich Chancellery carted away.
The air within hadn't moved in almost 8 decades. First, they deployed a robotic crawler armed with a 4K camera, thermal imaging, and chemical sensors. The results were grim. The bunker was unstable, the air toxic. Even so, the team pressed forward. Engineers reinforced the passage and pumped in ventilation. Only then, in protective suits and breathing gear, did the first group of experts enter the Führer bunker on foot. The moment they crossed the threshold, the stench hit them. Mold clung to every surface. The walls dripped with moisture. The entire ceiling beams had collapsed, forcing them to crawl through sections of the corridor. Pools of stagnant water stretched across the floor. The air was unnaturally cold, as if the structure itself was sealed in decay. And then came the preserved chambers. Some rooms were frozen in time, almost exactly as they had been left in April 1945. Metal-framed chairs still stood where they had been placed. On a cracked table sat rusted utensils, and beside them, what appeared to be a fossilized ration tin. On one wall, fragments of a Berlin map still clung to the plaster, peeled, discolored, but recognizable. In a corner of Hitler's private quarters stood a plain cot, draped with an old wool blanket. Near the headrest, a dark stain marked the fabric. It looked like dried blood. The sheet had never been disturbed. The conditions were brutal. The air was so toxic that researchers could only stay inside for 15 minutes at a time before rotating out. Spore counts registered 10 times above safe levels. Chemical traces hinted at old explosives, or perhaps poison. Floors sagged, walls bowed inward, and entire sections threatened to collapse. Still, the work went on. Every room was photographed, every object is catalogued, every inch scanned and preserved in a digital record. But the worst was yet to come. What were the despicable discoveries inside the bunker? Why do these things unsettle the world even today? Keep watching to find out. The worst discovery in the bunker. The emotional weight hit immediately. One historian vomited after seeing the cot. Another froze for nearly 10 minutes, unable to move. A structural engineer broke down in tears after crawling through a narrow passage and stumbling into the communications room, calling it a descent into death. Others said the silence itself was unbearable, oppressive, as though the walls were still listening. Was this the residue of evil? A space sealed in failure, refusing to rot away entirely? And yet, what they had seen so far was only the surface. Deeper inside the Führer bunker, the team encountered something far worse. These final chambers carried a chilling precision. They weren't just the last rooms of a dying regime. They were the last spaces Adolf Hitler himself controlled. As the experts began their inventory, the real shock came not from what had been taken, but from what had remained untouched for nearly 8 decades. At the far end of the bunker, sealed behind heavy steel doors, lay the leader's quarters. The first discovery was what was left of Hitler's desk. Its surface had been shattered, likely by blast shock or collapsing debris, yet parts of it were still intact. Inside a cracked drawer, they found scraps of burned paper. Scattered across the floor were torn maps. One map showed Berlin covered in frantic red pencil notations. Another depicted post-war Europe, its territories already divided between the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. It suggested Hitler had resigned himself to defeat, obsessively tracking the world that would rise from his ruin. On the wall, a portrait of Frederick the Great, one of Hitler's idols, hung crooked, its glass shattered inward as if struck in anger or despair. But the most disturbing find in this room was the decayed frame of a couch. Mold consumed its fabric, the center cushion sagging inward. Near the top edge, investigators identified a dark stain. Tests confirmed it was blood. Experts believe this was the very spot where Hitler and Eva Braun ended their lives on April 30th, 1945. There was nothing ceremonial about it. The scene felt abrupt, chaotic, and final. Nearby, the communications room told its own story. Partially collapsed, it was still recognizable. Tangled wires hung from the ceiling, burned-out radio equipment lay in piles, and on the far side stood a sealed metal cabinet, untouched since the last days of the Reich. Forced entry into the sealed cabinet revealed stacks of Morse code transmission logs. Most were dated between April 28th and 30th, many stamped classified. The final transmission chilled the translators with its bluntness. What was in the final transmission? Keep watching to find out. No departure. End procedure confirmed. That was the message. No departure, end procedure confirmed. To analysts, this was not just a message, it was a confession. Hitler had never intended to escape. His death was premeditated, scripted, as the final act of control. The surrounding artifacts deepened the sense of horror. On a nearby table sat dented ration tins stamped with the date April 28th. In an ashtray, 2 half-smoked cigarettes had fused to the surface under decades of moisture. Resting beside them was a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, later matched to Joseph Goebbels' prescription records. Then came the most haunting find. In a corner of the staff quarters, investigators uncovered a small stuffed rabbit, faded, one ear missing, the fabric stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Though ownership could not be confirmed, many experts believe it once belonged to one of the Goebbels' children, all of whom were poisoned by their parents inside the bunker. But recovering these remains was only the first step. To understand them, experts needed to interpret their meaning. The objects weren't just remnants of defeat, they were psychological signatures. Every fragment, burned maps, fractured furniture, and blood-stained upholstery formed part of a final, obsessive narrative. Teams of forensic specialists, military historians, and trauma psychologists worked together to decode it. What emerged was not just evidence of a regime collapsing, but of a leader consumed by obsession, trapped in delusion, and choreographing his own annihilation. The Führer bunker, they concluded, was less a command center than a tomb, carefully designed for an inevitable end. One of the most important discoveries came from forensic analysis inside Hitler's private quarters. Samples taken from the site revealed chemical evidence consistent with long-standing historical reports. Hitler had prepared for his final moments using poison, followed by a gunshot. The results also matched accounts that Eva Braun had relied on poison alone. Additional traces suggested that other fast-acting substances were present, likely provided by medical staff as a last insurance policy. For investigators, this was more than just physical evidence. It was confirmation that these events were not impulsive, but planned in advance. This raises the bigger question. What really inspired the design of Hitler's bunker? And why was this the path he chose? Let's find out. The Führer Bunker, Hitler's last stand. By early 1945, Berlin was collapsing. Soviet tanks were crushing the city, Allied bombs rained from above, and the once mighty Reich was crumbling. Hitler had disappeared from public view. Where was he? Underground. Literally. He was sealed inside a concrete stronghold meant to outlast the empire he knew was doomed. The Führerbunker wasn't just a shelter. It was his last command center, buried deep beneath the Reich Chancellery. Built in 2 phases, it began with the Vorbunker in 1936, a simple underground refuge. But as defeat became inevitable, Hitler demanded something bigger, deeper, and completely bomb-proof. Construction on the second phase began in 1943. The new bunker demanded speed, secrecy, and absolute obedience. Forced laborers, many of them Soviet POWs and political prisoners dragged from nearby camps, poured thousands of tons of concrete. The work was brutal, food was scarce, beatings were routine, and anyone who slowed down or collapsed risked being shot on the spot. Many didn't survive the construction. Hitler rarely inspected the site, but when he did, his fury was legendary. Engineers remembered him raging over faulty ventilation and shouting that the bunker had to withstand the very end of the world. When he discovered a wall thinner than his specifications, he slammed his fist onto the blueprints and threatened to execute the chief engineer unless it was fixed immediately. The final design went far beyond ordinary protection. The Führerbunker was buried more than 8 meters underground, its walls and ceilings reinforced with over 3 meters of concrete. It was built to survive direct bomb strikes. Inside, 18 rooms were connected by narrow corridors and sealed off by heavy steel doors. The complex held electric generators, water pumps, diesel reserves, chemical toilets, and air filtration systems in case of a gas attack. Hitler's private quarters included an emergency exit, a study, and even a small laboratory. Thick plaster coated the walls to muffle echoes. There were no windows, no sunlight, only a cold, suffocating fortress of survival. By January 1945, Hitler moved in permanently. The bunker became the last command post of a crumbling empire. With him were Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, a handful of SS guards, and his secretaries. From underground, Hitler issued impossible orders to divisions that no longer existed. He screamed at generals, rejected the truth, and clung to illusions of control. Above ground, the Reich was collapsing. Below ground, he pretended it wasn't. By April 1945, with Soviet forces closing in on Berlin, Hitler dictated his final will and testament. That same night, he married Eva Braun in a brief midnight ceremony. Just 2 days later, on April 30th, the pair ended their lives. Their bodies were hastily burned, but only partially destroyed. When Soviet troops entered the bunker, they found chaos, scattered belongings, bloodstains on the walls, and an eerie silence. In 1947, the Soviets tried to demolish the site with explosives, but much of the structure endured. Later, East German authorities built apartment blocks over the ruins, sealed the entrances, and erased nearly every trace of the bunker from public maps. For decades, no one was allowed back in. How long could this secrecy last? What triggered the excavations? Keep watching to find out. Protecting the secrets in the bunker. The cover-up began immediately after the war. In May 1945, Soviet troops secured the bunker site. Officially, they were safeguarding the area. In reality, they were erasing it. Within days, Soviet teams combed through the ruins, photographing bloodstains, recovering bone fragments, and collecting documents. But what they removed, and what they chose not to reveal, remains a mystery. According to Soviet records, Hitler's burned remains were recovered, studied, and then destroyed again. Yet the records themselves were contradictory, often delayed, and sometimes deliberately misleading. Stalin, despite knowing the truth from his own investigators, refused to confirm Hitler's death publicly. Instead, he allowed rumors to circulate that Hitler might have escaped. In 1945, Soviet investigators didn't just recover personal effects from the bunker. They also removed classified files, coded messages, and several small boxes whose contents were never revealed. None of these items have surfaced since. By 1946, the Soviet secret police, later the KGB, sealed the area and declared it off-limits. Declassified East German intelligence files reveal that KGB officers remained in Berlin well into the late 1940s with one mission: suppressing the bunker. Some reports claim they were tasked with retrieving Hitler's last correspondence. Others suggest they found something else, something they didn't want the world to see. Years later, German construction crews stumbled upon a hidden chamber linked to the bunker. This room wasn't on any blueprints, and it had been sealed shut from the inside. The Soviets never mentioned it. No photos exist. Did they really choose not to keep records? Or was it a gross oversight? Let's see. The design of the secret chamber. German engineers who had worked on the bunker told Western journalists that not every room was entered by the Soviets. They spoke of sealed steel doors and airtight compartments designed to withstand gas attacks. Yet Soviet reports insist the entire complex was searched and cleared. So who was telling the truth? By the 1970s, East Germany launched a systematic campaign to erase the bunker entirely. Bulldozers leveled what was left above ground. The entrance was packed with concrete and rubble. State archives deliberately misrecorded the site's location. Apartment blocks were built over it, and maps were quietly altered to erase its coordinates. No markers, no plaques, no warnings. The government wanted the world to forget it ever existed. Decades later, new contradictions emerged. During the 1970s and 1980s, East German construction workers sent to redevelop the area spoke uneasily about what they found. One worker later confided to a journalist that parts of the bunker walls were scarred with scratch marks, as if people had clawed at them in desperation. One worker later admitted he believed the marks on the walls hadn't been made with tools, but with fingernails. In some places, he claimed faint words in German could be seen: verloren, lost, and Neid, mercy. Another worker swore he and his team had been ordered to seal off a chamber that didn't appear on any blueprint. Inside, he remembered finding candle stubs arranged in a circle and a dark stain on the floor that looked disturbingly like dried blood. When they reported it, the response was silence. They were told to seal the room and never speak of it again. These accounts can't be confirmed, but they weren't isolated. Residents living near the site whispered about strange noises beneath the ground. Some spoke of muffled voices. Others claimed they heard screaming rise up through the pavement at night. Officials dismissed the stories as superstition, but many locals avoided walking anywhere near the spot. Even today, older Berliners talk about the ground there as if it carries a weight, a heaviness that never lifted. Historians and psychologists who later studied these accounts suggested they reflected the trauma of 1945, when Berlin collapsed in terror and despair. One specialist even called the bunker a psychological sinkhole, a place where the final madness of the Nazi regime seemed to seep into the very walls. Whether the scratches, the bones, and the hidden chambers were real or invented, the stories themselves took on a life of their own. Passed in whispers, retold in fragments, they gave the Führerbunker an aura of dread that never faded. Beneath Berlin, something was sealed away, and in memory, it never truly ended. Why was the secret bunker spectacular? What really went into this design? Let's find out. Hitler and his vision to change the world. Psychologists studying the layout and contents of the bunker pointed to disturbing signs of micromanagement. Every room held ration inventories, stacked and organized with mechanical precision. Furniture had been arranged at deliberate angles. Even in the chaos of Berlin's collapse, documents were filed in order. as if the illusion of structure could hold back the storm outside. One expert described it as order in the middle of collapse, a desperate attempt to control the smallest details while the larger world was slipping away, a testament to the kind of man Hitler was. Adolf Hitler was born in Braunau am Inn, a small town in Austria-Hungary, before moving to Germany in 1913. During World War I, he served in the German army and was decorated with the Iron Cross for bravery. After the war in 1919, he joined the German Workers' Party, which later became the Nazi Party. By 1921, he had risen to lead the party. 2 years later, in 1923, he tried to overthrow the government in Munich in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The coup failed, and Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he served just over 1. While jailed, he dictated Mein Kampf, My Struggle, part autobiography and part political manifesto. When Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the roles of head of state and government, giving himself absolute power. At home, he unleashed racist policies targeting Jews and other groups he labeled undesirable. Early in his rule, Germany experienced rapid economic recovery and began rearming, breaking the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. Hitler annexed territories with large German-speaking populations, moves that, at first, boosted his popularity. Central to his plans was the idea of Lebensraum, living space, which meant expanding eastward into Europe. In September 1939, Hitler's invasion of Poland triggered World War II, as Britain and France declared war on Germany. Over the next 2 years, his forces conquered much of Europe and North Africa, but in 1941, after attacking the Soviet Union and declaring war on the United States, the tide began to turn. By 1945, Allied forces had pushed Germany to collapse. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, inside his Berlin bunker. The next day, facing certain defeat and Soviet capture, the couple took their lives. What do you think about Hitler and his secret bunker discovery? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.